Have you ever met someone who seemed perfect on the surface? They smiled at the right moments. They said all the right things. They even made you feel comfortable. But deep down, something felt off. You couldn't explain it. There was no proof. Just a quiet inner signal telling you, don't trust this. And then later, days, weeks, or months later, you realized your instinct was right. That feeling wasn't paranoia, it wasn't overthinking, it was awareness. In today's world, sincerity is rare, and deception is subtle. People don't show their true intentions immediately. They reveal them through patterns, energy, and behavior. Today, I'm going to show you how to identify a sincere person almost immediately, without interrogating them, without testing them, and without getting emotionally attached too fast. This video isn't about judging people. It's about protecting your time, your energy, and your heart. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who looked genuine, if you've ever trusted too quickly and paid the price, stay with me till the end, because once you understand these signs, you'll never see people the same way again. Let's be real for a moment. We're living in a time where attention is currency, and authenticity is often sacrificed for approval. People don't fake interest because they're evil. They fake it because it works. Kindness is used as a strategy. Empathy becomes a tool. And words are thrown around so often that they've lost their weight. Trust me, I care about you. I'm being honest. Anyone can say these things. That's why most people don't lie with their words. They lie with behavior gaps. They say one thing and consistently do another. Sincerity is rare because it's uncomfortable. It requires emotional courage, the courage to be consistent even when it costs you something. It requires integrity, doing the right thing when no one is watching, when there's no reward, and when there's nothing to gain. A sincere person doesn't need an audience. They don't need validation. They don't need to impress. And that's exactly why they stand out. So, if you want to recognize sincerity quickly, stop listening only to what people say and start watching what they repeat. Because sincerity always leaves a pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. A sincere person doesn't try to impress you with promises. They don't rush to say things like, I'll always be there for you. I care more than anyone. You can trust me, no matter what. Because real sincerity doesn't announce itself. Instead, it shows up quietly. A sincere person does what they said they would do, not once, not when it's easy, but especially when it's inconvenient. When they say they'll call, they call. When they say they'll help, they show up. When they say they care, their behavior reflects it without reminders. Insincere people rely on big words and emotional statements. They create intensity with language, but avoid responsibility in action. That's the gap. And that gap never lies. When someone's words feel heavy, but their actions feel light, your intuition is already answering the question for you. Sincere people don't need to convince you. They don't need to sell trust. They let consistency do the talking. So stop measuring sincerity by how strong someone sounds. Measure it by how often their actions line up with their words, especially when no one is watching and there's nothing to gain. That's where sincerity lives. Pay very close attention to this. A sincere person is comfortable with silence. They don't rush to fill every quiet moment. They don't feel the need to impress you with constant talking. They don't panic when a conversation slows down. Why? Because they're not performing. Silence doesn't threaten them. It reveals them. Sincere people are present, not rehearsed. They're thinking before they speak, not speaking just to be noticed. Fake people, on the other hand, fear silence. They rush to fill it with jokes, compliments, stories, or opinions. Anything to stay in control of how they're perceived. Because when there's silence, there's nowhere to hide. No script, no image to protect, just intention. Watch how someone reacts when a conversation pauses. Do they stay grounded or do they become restless? Comfort with silence is confidence without ego. It's honesty without performance. So the next time you're with someone, don't rush the moment. Let the pause exist. If they remain calm, centered, and present, you're likely in the presence of someone sincere. Because truth doesn't need noise to survive. This sign separates confidence from insecurity immediately. Insincere people need approval, not connection, approval. They subtly push you toward their viewpoint using phrases like, "Don't you think? Everyone agrees with me. You're the only one who understands me." At first, it sounds harmless, even flattering. But what they're really doing is guiding your opinion, not to understand you, but to validate themselves. A sincere person doesn't do that. They don't corner you emotionally. They don't need you to agree with them to feel secure. They don't panic when you see things differently. Instead, they're comfortable saying, "That's your perspective. I see it differently, and that's okay. You're allowed to feel that way." That level of calm only comes from inner stability. Manipulative people use emotion to control alignment. They exaggerate stories. They play the victim. They create pressure to pick a side. Sincere people don't recruit you into their narrative. They give you space to think. They allow disagreement without punishment. They don't withdraw affection when you don't agree. Pay attention to how someone reacts when you challenge them, even gently. Do they listen, or do they get defensive, dismissive, or subtly offended? Trying to control your opinion is about power. Respecting your perspective is about sincerity. And here's the truth most people miss. Anyone who needs you to see the world exactly the way they do is not trying to connect with you. They're trying to control how they're seen. Sincere people don't demand agreement. They trust that truth can stand on its own, without pressure. This sign is subtle, but once you recognize it, you'll never miss it again. Sincerity feels calm. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, not emotionally addictive. When someone is sincere, being around them feels steady. There's no emotional rush, no pressure to connect faster than you're ready for, because sincerity doesn't try to hook you. Be cautious of people who rush emotional closeness, who overshare deeply within minutes, who push trust before it has been earned. That intensity often feels exciting, but excitement is not the same as safety. Fast connection can be a strategy. Some people create emotional intensity to bypass boundaries. They want closeness without trust, attachment without consistency, and loyalty without time. A sincere person moves differently. They let things develop naturally. They don't push you to open up before you're comfortable. They don't make you feel guilty for needing space. They understand that trust is built, not demanded. Their energy is grounded, predictable, respectful. And here's something important. Calm doesn't mean boring. It means stable. It means you don't feel emotionally pulled, confused, or overwhelmed. You don't feel the need to explain yourself constantly. You don't feel rushed to prove anything. Sincere people respect emotional boundaries because they have boundaries themselves. So, pay attention to how someone makes you feel, not just what they say. If their presence brings clarity instead of chaos, peace instead of pressure, and consistency instead of intensity, you're likely dealing with someone sincere. Because real connection doesn't rush, it roots. Here's a simple but powerful test. When you're speaking, are they actually listening or just waiting for their turn to talk? A sincere person listens with intention. They're not mentally preparing their response while you're mid-sentence. They're not interrupting to redirect the conversation back to themselves. They're fully present. You can feel the difference. Sincere listeners remember small details you didn't think mattered. They bring them up later, naturally, without trying to impress. They ask thoughtful follow-up questions, not surface-level ones. And most importantly, they don't interrupt your emotions. If you're sharing something difficult, they don't rush to fix it. They don't minimize it. They don't compete with their own story. They allow your experience to exist. Fake interest looks attentive at first, but disappears the moment attention shifts away from them. They nod but don't absorb. They hear but don't retain. They listen just long enough to speak again. Watch what happens when you talk about something that doesn't involve them. Do they stay engaged, or do they slowly disconnect? Real listening is rare because it requires humility, and humility is a form of sincerity. When someone listens to understand, not to respond, they're showing you something powerful. They value you, not just the sound of their own voice. This sign never lies. If you want to see who someone really is, don't watch how they treat you. Watch how they treat people who can't do anything for them. Pay attention to how they speak to waiters, drivers, strangers, and people they consider beneath their status, because sincerity doesn't change based on power. Insincere people are selective with their respect. They're polite when it benefits them, charming when they want something, dismissive when they don't. Their kindness has conditions. A sincere person is consistent. They don't perform kindness for attention. They don't look down on people who can't elevate them. They don't switch personalities depending on who's watching. How someone treats service workers reveals their character instantly. There's no audience to impress, no reward to gain, just habit. And habits expose truth. If someone is rude, dismissive, or entitled in small moments, that behavior doesn't disappear. It just waits for permission. Sincerity isn't about status. It's about respect. So remember this. If someone only treats important people well, they're not sincere, they're strategic. Because when respect is conditional, so is their sincerity. And that condition will eventually include you. This sign is a clear marker of emotional maturity. Sincere people don't become defensive when they're confronted. They don't rush to protect their ego. They don't turn the conversation into an argument. You won't hear them say, "You're too sensitive. That's not what I meant. You misunderstood me." Those phrases are shields used to avoid responsibility. A sincere person responds differently. They pause, they listen, and they reflect. They're able to say, "I see your point. I may be wrong. I didn't realize that affected you. I'll work on that." That doesn't make them weak. It makes them grounded. Taking responsibility without defensiveness requires self-awareness. It means valuing truth over pride, connection over control. Insincere people view accountability as a threat. They deflect, justify, or shift blame because admitting fault would crack the image they're trying to protect. Sincere people don't protect an image, they protect integrity. They understand that being wrong doesn't reduce their worth. It strengthens trust. So pay attention to how someone reacts when you express discomfort or set a boundary. Do they listen and adjust, or do they dismiss and defend? Because accountability isn't just an apology. It's changed behavior, and that's sincerity in action. This sign reveals itself slowly, but when it does, it tells you everything. Sincerity is boring to fake. Anyone can appear genuine for a day, a week, even a month. But time exposes truth. Maintaining a false version of yourself requires energy, attention, and control. Eventually, cracks form, stories shift, behavior changes. Sincere people don't change based on mood, audience, or benefit. They show up the same way, in good moments and uncomfortable ones, when they're gaining something and when they're not. Their tone is familiar, their values are stable, their reactions are predictable. That's not dull, that's trustworthy. Insincere people feel different every time you meet them. One day warm, the next distant. Supportive when it suits them, unavailable when it doesn't. That inconsistency creates confusion, and confusion is often mistaken for depth. It's not. It's a lack of sincerity. Pay attention to patterns, not moments, to behavior over time, not emotional spikes. Because sincerity doesn't rely on effort, it's natural. So, if someone feels grounded, familiar, and reliable across time, you're likely seeing the real person. But if someone feels like a stranger in different situations, that's not growth. That's a mask slipping, and time always pulls the mask off. This sign is critical because vulnerability is trust in its purest form. When you open up to someone, when you share your fears, your pain, your past, you're handing them something sacred. A sincere person understands that. They don't joke about your struggles. They don't minimize what hurt you. They don't store your weaknesses to use later. Your vulnerability is safe with them. Insincere people do the opposite. They listen carefully, not to understand, but to collect information. And during conflict, that information becomes a weapon. They throw your past in your face. They bring up old wounds to win arguments. They use your openness to control, shame, or silence you. The moment someone uses your pain against you, their sincerity is exposed. Because real sincerity protects, it doesn't exploit. A sincere person may disagree with you, but they won't cross that line. They won't attack your character using what you trusted them with. They won't punish you for being honest. So, pay attention during moments of tension. Do they stay respectful, or do they reach for your deepest wound? Because someone who truly cares about you will guard your vulnerability like it's their own. And anyone who doesn't was never sincere to begin with. Your nervous system knows the truth long before your mind catches up. Before logic, before explanations, before excuses. Around sincere people, your body responds first. You breathe easier without realizing it. Your shoulders relax. Your thoughts slow down. You don't over-explain yourself. You don't rehearse your words. You don't feel the need to perform or prove anything. That sense of ease is not accidental. It's safety. Sincere people create emotional stability. Their words, tone, and behavior align in a way your nervous system recognizes as non-threatening. But when something isn't right, your body reacts immediately. You feel tense, alert, guarded. Your chest tightens. Your mind stays on edge. You feel like you have to be careful with every word. That's not intuition being dramatic. That's your body detecting inconsistency. We've been trained to ignore these signals, to rationalize them, to talk ourselves out of what we feel. Don't. Your body is constantly scanning for truth. It reads tone, timing, energy, and intention faster than conscious thought ever could. So listen to how someone makes you feel, not just emotionally, but physically. Because sincerity doesn't create anxiety, it creates calm. And when your body feels safe, that's often the most honest signal you'll ever receive. This is the part most people overlook. Sincere people don't chase you. They don't beg for trust. They don't pressure you to open up. They don't force connection or demand closeness, not because they don't care, but because they respect choice. Sincerity doesn't rush attachment. It doesn't manipulate emotions. It doesn't use urgency to create dependency. Instead, sincere people create space. They show up consistently, stay honest, and allow others to move toward them naturally. There's no emotional pulling, no guilt, no pressure to respond faster, commit sooner, or feel more. Manipulative people chase because they need control. They confuse intensity with connection. They confuse pursuit with sincerity. But real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need reassurance. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to convince you of anything. Confidence without manipulation is sincerity. A sincere person is comfortable being chosen or not. They don't take your boundaries personally. They don't punish distance. They don't dramatize your pace. So if someone allows you to come closer at your own speed, respects your space, and remains consistent without pressure, that's not indifference. That's sincerity in its purest form. If someone in your life constantly feels confusing, if their words and actions never fully match, if you find yourself overthinking their intentions, replaying conversations, or doubting your instincts, that confusion is already an answer. Sincerity doesn't create chaos. It doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't make you question your worth or your perception. Sincerity feels simple, clear, grounded. It feels like stability, not emotional turbulence. It feels like calm, not constant analysis. The truth is, we often ignore clarity because confusion can feel emotionally intense. But intensity is not the same as honesty. And here's something even more important. The more sincere you become with your words, your actions, and your intentions, the easier it becomes to recognize sincerity in others. Because sincerity recognizes sincerity. So if this video helped you see people, or even yourself, more clearly, I want you to do something simple but powerful. Comment below, I choose clarity, not just in relationships, but in friendships, decisions, and the energy you allow into your life. And remember, protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's wisdom, because the right people won't make you question their sincerity. They'll prove it without saying a word.